To be honest, I dreaded it and not looking forward to being in the services. But having been to Leeds, in fact, for the medical, to prove that I was fit enough to be in the services, I met with a group of similar-minded young men and found an immediate attachment with them. Having enlisted and moved off to Bedfordshire was okay. I think probably the worst thing initially was packing up all your civilian clothes, putting them in a suitcase and saying goodbye to them, because you didn't feel as if you belonged to anybody except the R.A.F. from that time on. It was quite a scary experience, especially being posted to Hennisford, which is on Cannock Chase, in a very remote part of Cannock Chase, to the square bashing camp for 6 or 8 weeks, I think it was, and you were treated just like an animal. You know, everything was you must, and the language was alien to me. Yes, it was a very enlightening experience, I put it that way. To be honest, the move at the end of training at Hednesford was from there down to Middle Wallop in Hampshire, which was a totally different atmosphere. You became a person again, and you felt as if you were learning something that was useful. Fighter plotting at that time seemed to have need of more people than other trades, and it was interesting to feel that you were in the R.A.F. and something to do with flying, not just pen pushing in an office. As I say, trade training, you became a person again, and people valued what you were doing and encouraged you, which was good. We travelled up overnight by train, arriving at Waverley. Yes, a mixture of young men. I think the majority of them were Londoners. And we arrived at Turnhouse very early morning and were greeted by somebody at the guardroom who gave us shovels to go and clear the runway of snow. Which was rather a surprise, if we put it that way. This name Barnton Quarry came up. It was very surprising actually to find that the bunker was in such a sort of derelict area, really in that woodland. But the intriguing bit, of course, was the tunnel, and how much and what there was down at the bottom of the tunnel. From the outside, nobody would guess that such a building was there. You know, having been through the basic training and trade training, this next level, you weren't sure how strict everything was, until he'd got used to it. You expected the worst and hoped for the best. And it worked out. It was quite a comfortable situation. You didn't feel under threat at all. One might have just ended up with a headset on, sitting at a plotting table, moving arrows around. And you could have possibly, if you didn't show initiative anyway, you could spend the rest of the 2 years doing just that. But for one reason or some others, I seemed to be spotted and encouraged. So I actually didn't spend very much time actually doing fighter plotting, which was my trade, but was taken into the office department to work with the control executive and the air executive, which were on the second floor, overlooking the main floor. But it was amazing to think that there was all that under the ground. And so super, I mean, it was beautiful. It's such a shame that it was vandalised eventually and burnt out and in the state that it was when you took over, shall we say. In the woodland area there was the gate was in a different situation from where it is now. We decanted from the transport and we were obliged to march as a group into the quarry, to the guard rooms. There was always an R.A.F. police on duty, and they would do spot checks on identities. For some reason, I could only think it was for hygiene, we had to go into the filter plotting centre first to change shoes, because somebody had the idea you had to wear plimsolls all the time. So you went in there, you passed the guard twice so that he could, if he was feeling that way, he could pick you up on your uniform and or ask who you are or whatever. Originally the tunnel itself had sisal cocoa matting the whole length of it, which was absolutely filthy with the constant treading. But I can't remember just how long it was before that was taken away and the whole tunnel was fitted out with lino tiles with studs on, so that there was no skidding and it was quiet to walk on and much more hygienic, of course. But the whole tunnel was right down to the bottom, where you turn right at the bottom, and that was the sort of little showpiece where the R.A.F. badges and photographs of the commanding officers and whatnot were. A sort of welcoming area. It was very nice, actually.
And the cycling has been prepared over the last few days, just as a bit southeast, as estimated. And then we've got these minor fronts going up across the northern part of the country. We got a fairly good western radio.
wondering, Alan, if you could tell us what the kind of layout and look of this space would have been during that period.
Well, the main floor, there would be a huge plotting table at this side, covered the whole of the UK, mainly as far down as Norfolk. So there was Caledonian sectors, certainly, northern, western, part of eastern and part of southern sector on that. But that covered a sort of very wide area. It was called the ground situation map. And then on that side there was what was commonly called the fighter table, which was really covering just Scotland, Caledonia, and that was where the main plotting was done. The map would have had on it all the different radar stations.
And the fact that we've had over the last 2 days, strangely,
all concentrated on the east side of the UK, of course, because that was where the threat was from.
we got a fairly good threat situated in the north, fairly good visibility on the east coast.
Just trying to think, I can't remember the actual first day of working down there, but I presume I must have been down on the floor level, plotting at one of the tables. The plotting actually was done with metallic metal arrows of 3 colours, red, yellow and blue. And according to the clock on the wall, every 2.5 minutes the colour was different. Everything had to change as the clock changed so that people up above would know how stale the information on the table was. If it was yellow but the clock had gone round to red, then they knew it was X minutes old and probably no longer any use. So it was just a rudimentary way, I think, of keeping up to date with progress on the tables. There was an art in the plotting itself because there were long metal rods with magnets on the end, and the arrow had to go on the end, and sometimes if you were on the big table the rods were so long that you had to have an assistant to put the arrow on for you because you couldn't possibly physically stretch. Every aircraft to begin with was always identified as hostile.
Target, followed by the time that you drop the bomb.
Until radar stations could confirm that actually it was an R.A.F. plane doing an exercise.
If you abandon the primary target, the target has decided to abandon the primary target.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Alan, in the last room as well, you'd mentioned in your audio recordings as well that you had got a bit of a promotion at some point. Do you think that made life a bit easier, a bit harder, a bit more comfortable here in the bunker?
Both, really. It made life more interesting, but it gave you more responsibility, of course. We're in charge of a group of people, for one thing, and you had to show them and tell them what to do, show leadership, keep them sweet, I suppose, you know, to get them to do what they were supposed to be doing. But you were also, of course, more responsible. You carried the can if anything did go wrong. Generally speaking, the aircraft that we spotted and plotted were all on training flights. But they always sent their flight plans through by telephone, and up in the office we recorded them, so it helped with identification. If in doubt, of course, fighters were scrambled, and they were often scrambled actually. Even then Russians did fly in and around, but were soon identified and shoved off.
Right. So, can you remember how often it happened that fighters would be scrambled?
Oh, scrambling probably 2 or 3 times a week.
And
I would imagine
that you found exciting when that happened, or was it?
Yes,
stressful?
it was up to a point, but at the same time, at the back of your mind, you probably knew it was going to be another rush, and they were going to be escorted out of the area. But there was always just that chance that maybe, maybe not.
And the fact that I compared over the last few days, just as estimated, and then we've got these minor funds going up.
Whereabouts in the bunker was your main workplace?
The second floor down, the middle of the balcony really, as we call it, facing where the totes were. They don't exist now, of course, they're not there, are they?
And the fact that I compared over the last few days, just as estimated, we got a fairly good grading north, yeah, which will give us a fairly good visibility on the east coast, but a fair amount of cloud as well, very pronounced cloud.
Compared with the work you were doing when you were in Hampshire, did you have to learn a lot more once you arrived at the bunker? Or?
I mean, obviously, at Middle Wallop, you didn't get any training for being an air executive's assistant. But it was simple enough. I mean, it was basically clerical work, recording from phone calls, passing it on to the actual air executive officer for him to, yes, say so, that's okay, or that isn't, It was just another job that had to be done, but it was a responsible job.
180 good established on North 180.
And I do remember once, and I'm not just sort of blowing my own trumpet, but one night shift we were doing, for one reason or another, the controlling officer and I were the only ones on duty in that office because it was a skeleton crew, and he went off somewhere, and I suddenly got that feeling, I'm sitting here, I'm the only one in charge of Caledonian sector. Oh, what do I do? It was only for a few minutes.
7-1, kill West Group, 33642. 436,000.
This where we are now, it would be probably Home Office personnel.
Okay.
And WRVS next door,
Right.
Fixer Room next door, yeah, I think, yeah.
You've got a good memory.
Yeah. Oh.
So interesting. So, while this bunker had initially been built for that purpose of defence, senior military officers and senior governmental officials increasingly began to be sceptical about the ability of this bunker to perform that function of defence.
180 good established on North 180.
There was a Mayday call. There was an R.A.F. rescue helicopter from Lucas was delivering some Christmas goodies to the keepers on the Bell Rock Lighthouse, which is in Firth of Forth.
United Denver, departure United 328 Heavy Mayday aircraft just experienced engine failure, needed turn immediately.
And for some unknown reason the helicopter blade caught the lighthouse and it crashed, and we were listening in on conversations between the two.
Mayday, we have a smoke in the cabin.
And Seabird 59 Tango, just for my confirmation, you declared Mayday?
Seabird 59 Tango, Mayday declared incapacitated and very poorly pilot, so we need assistance on arrival.
And there was this awful feeling of what was going to happen and happened. You were listening to somebody's last words. There's nothing you could do about it. Sadly, of course, the helicopter crew lost their lives over it. If you get on a low moment, you think about these things, and that's always going to be there, I think. For my sins, I got promotion, but with promotion always comes more responsibility. And that led to being a responsible person for security too. Especially when the bunker was not actually being used by service personnel. We had to do a week at a time in residence. We were allowed to go back to Turnhouse for lunch, but other than that we were there and had to patrol it. Usually there was an NCO and 6 airmen, and you took it 2 hours on, 4 hours off, patrolling the bunker for fire, really, and general security. And it was quite eerie being down that bunker on your own at night. As you know, I mean, there are so many different rooms. And then really down at the bottom, the escape route down there was quite eerie. Most of my working time I sat actually there.
Right.
And there was a bank of phones there. And you spent your time taking messages about flight plans, pass it on to the air executive who sat there, control executive. He had more phones at that side, and then he could contact either the fighter marshal next door or airfield.
So loads of desks around the...
Yeah. I mean, you had a very narrow, about that size, just to work on.
Yeah.
But what they used to call a PBX, private branch exchange of phones, which phones at either side, and you flick the lever that way or this way, depending which one you were using. But it was mostly telephone contact. Mostly the flight plans were drawn on with a chinograph pencil, as they were called, on a wax transparent surface that you could wipe it clean and use it. You weren't not reams and reams of paper. But just for interest, this whole building had one telephone line, It was Davidson's Mains 77293. And that got you into, you know, all the communications within the building. It was all divided into hundreds of separate lines on the exchange. In fact, I think it was this floor, or it might have been the one above, there was a PBX room where you could flick jack the lines in and connect different people with different ones there. But I always remember the phone number, because when you ever went away on weekend leave or anything, you had to fill a form in and have your phone number on it. Davidson's Mains 77293. Yeah, happy days.
You should try ringing it now and see
what happens. Yeah.
What was your social life like at this time?
Used to congregate in the NAFI a lot, which was a good supplement to the normal food that the R.A.F served up, which tended to be stodgy, I must admit. But the NAFI was a great service there. But we used to get out into Edinburgh quite a lot, actually, and go to cinemas. And lots of walks in fine weather. I mean, some lovely walks. You could trespass on the railway at Turnhouse and get onto the riverbank. And walk all the way down to Crammond. It was just like a weekend. Yes, you could relax. I was looking forward to the next stage of my training as a teacher, going to college. I'd sort of planned this, that this is what I wanted to do, teaching, so that was the next step. But at the same time, I suppose regretting that that time was over, because I really enjoyed it. In fact, I got out of the R.A.F a few days early because of Barnton College. Should have been the 21st of September, but I got out on the 6th, I think. Because I think, you know, with hindsight now, possibly by 1956 things were running down at Barnton anyway, because it was going to change its role from being, you know, the radar had become so sophisticated that they didn't need that facility. And then, of course, it became the regional seat of government. It was changing its role completely. We weren't getting new recruits. Something was being planned, obviously. I'm just so sad that all that vandalism and fire and everything happened to it. But it's shaping up, isn't it?
This is the Wartime Broadcasting Service. We shall bring you further information as soon as possible. We shall be on the air every hour on the hour. Stay tuned to this wavelength but switch your radios off now to save your batteries. That is the end of this broadcast.
Is that the first time you've been back at the bunker since 1956?
Yeah, that was the first time, and I'm so glad that I came. I'm glad that my daughter pushed me forward that day. And horrified when that man stepped forward and said, "We'd rather listen to you than Ben." Dear, I thought, ooh.
It must have been very nostalgic, I imagine.
It was, yes, it was strange actually, strange, very strange, yeah.